The morning sun cast golden rays across the grand entrance of Buckingham Palace. Melania Trump stepped out of the black limousine, her designer heels clicking against the ancient cobblestones. She wore an elegant cream suit that cost more than most people earned in a year. Her sunglasses reflected the historic palace walls as she walked toward the entrance with confidence that came from years of being in the spotlight. She had traveled to London as part of a diplomatic visit, representing the United States at a charity event for children's education. The palace had opened its doors for this special occasion, and dignitaries from around the world were gathering inside. Melania had attended hundreds of such events, always maintaining her composed and sophisticated demeanor. Today felt like just another routine appearance in her busy schedule. As she approached the main entrance, she noticed a royal guard standing at attention. He wore the traditional red tunic and tall bearskin hat that had become symbols of British tradition. His face remained expressionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead as protocol demanded. He stood perfectly still, like a statue carved from stone, embodying centuries of military discipline and honor. Melania paused for a moment, pulling out her phone to capture a photograph. She had seen royal guards before during previous visits to London, but something about this moment felt different. Perhaps it was the way the morning light illuminated the scene, or maybe she simply wanted a memory of this particular day. She raised her phone and took several pictures, adjusting her angle to get the perfect shot. "Excuse me," she said, lowering her phone and addressing the guard directly. "Would you mind stepping slightly to the left? The lighting would be better for a photograph." The guard remained motionless, his gaze never wavering from the invisible point he had been trained to focus on. His silence was not rude, but rather part of the strict rules that governed his position. Royal guards were known worldwide for their ability to remain completely still and silent, regardless of what happened around them. Melania felt a flicker of irritation. She was accustomed to people responding when she spoke, especially in formal settings where her presence as a former First Lady usually commanded immediate attention. She stepped closer to the guard, her voice taking on a firmer tone. "I'm speaking to you," she said. "Do you know who I am? I'm Melania Trump. I need you to move just a little bit for this photograph. It will only take a moment." The guard's expression did not change. His breathing remained steady and controlled, his posture perfect and unwavering. To any observer, it would seem as though he had not heard a single word. The bearskin hat sat firmly on his head, and his white gloves gripped his rifle with practiced precision. A small crowd of tourists had begun to gather nearby, recognizing Melania and watching the interaction with growing interest. Some pulled out their own phones, curious about what was unfolding. Melania became aware of the attention, which only strengthened her resolve to get the response she expected. "This is quite disrespectful," she continued, her voice rising slightly. "In America, when someone of my position speaks to you, you acknowledge them. I'm not asking for much, just a simple adjustment for a photograph. Surely that's not too difficult." Still, the guard offered no response. His eyes remained fixed on the distant horizon, his jaw set in determination. Years of training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation. Tourists, celebrities, and even world leaders had tried countless times to break the famous silence of the royal guards, but their discipline held firm. Melania felt her cheeks flush with frustration. She was not accustomed to being ignored, especially in such a public setting. Throughout her years in the public eye, she had grown used to a certain level of deference and attention. This silent resistance felt like a personal slight, though she did not fully understand the cultural and military traditions behind it. An elderly couple standing nearby whispered to each other in British accents, clearly recognizing what was happening. The woman smiled gently, as if she had seen this scenario play out many times before with other visitors who did not understand the protocols of the royal guards. Melania decided to try a different approach. She softened her tone, attempting to appeal to the guard on a more personal level. "I understand you have your duties," she said, "but I'm here for an important charitable cause, children's education. Surely you can appreciate that. I just want one nice photograph to share with people who support this cause. It would mean a lot." The guard's stillness was absolute. Not a muscle twitched in his face. His breathing remained so steady that his chest barely seemed to move beneath the red tunic. The morning breeze stirred slightly, but he stood as immovable as the palace walls behind him. A member of the event staff, noticing the situation, hurried over with an apologetic expression. She was a middle-aged woman in a navy blue suit, wearing a name badge that identified her as part of the palace coordination team. Her face showed both professionalism and slight concern about the developing situation. "Mrs. Trump," the staff member said politely, "if I may explain, the royal guards are bound by very strict protocols. They cannot speak, move, or acknowledge anyone while on duty. It's a tradition that goes back centuries and is considered a fundamental part of their military discipline." Melania turned to face the woman, her expression showing both confusion and continued frustration. "Centuries of tradition?" she repeated. "But certainly exceptions can be made for dignified requests from visiting dignitaries. I'm not asking him to abandon his post, just a small movement for a photograph." The staff member maintained her polite smile, though her eyes showed the strain of managing a delicate diplomatic moment. "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Trump. The guards take their duty extremely seriously. Breaking protocol, even for a moment, even for someone of great importance, would be seen as a failure of their commitment. It's not meant as any disrespect to you personally." Melania looked back at the guard, studying his unwavering stance with a mixture of frustration and growing curiosity. She had encountered many forms of protocol and tradition in her travels, but this absolute commitment to duty was different from anything she had experienced before. Part of her remained annoyed at being ignored, but another part began to wonder what kind of training and dedication could produce such steadfast resolve. The tourists continued to watch, some filming the interaction on their phones. Melania became increasingly aware that this moment might be shared widely on social media, and she needed to handle it with grace. Yet her pride still felt wounded by the guards' complete lack of response to her presence and requests. "This is absolutely remarkable," she finally said, though her tone still carried an edge of displeasure. "I've met with presidents, kings, and queens around the world, and I've never encountered such stubborn silence." The guard remained exactly as he had been since the moment she arrived, a living embodiment of duty and tradition that refused to bend, regardless of who stood before him. The staff member gestured gently toward the palace entrance, trying to guide Melania away from the increasingly awkward situation. Other guests were beginning to arrive for the charity event, and several had slowed their pace to observe what was happening. The woman in the navy suit clearly wanted to avoid any further diplomatic complications. "Mrs. Trump, perhaps we should head inside now?" she suggested with diplomatic politeness. "The event will be starting soon, and I believe the organizers are eager to meet you. There will be many wonderful opportunities for photographs inside the palace." Melania stood her ground, her designer handbag hanging from her arm, as she continued to study the motionless guard. Something about his complete dedication bothered her deeply, though she could not quite articulate why. In her world, influence and recognition opened doors and commanded responses. This guard's refusal to acknowledge her, regardless of the reason, challenged everything she understood about status and respect. "Just one more moment," Melania said, to the staff member without taking her eyes off the guard. She stepped even closer, now standing just a few feet away from him. She could see the fine details of his uniform now, the precise way every button was fastened, every crease perfectly aligned. His face, though young, carried a weathered quality that suggested he had stood in all kinds of weather conditions, performing this same duty. "I respect tradition," Melania said, speaking directly to the guard again despite knowing he would not respond. "I truly do, but tradition should also include respect for others, especially when they're here for a good cause. These children we're helping today, they deserve better than rigid rules that prevent simple human courtesy." The guard's eyes remained fixed on that same distant point. His rifle stayed perfectly angled against his shoulder. A small bead of sweat formed on his temple, the only sign that he was a living person and not actually made of stone. The morning sun was growing warmer, and standing in the full uniform under the bearskin hat must have been uncomfortable, yet he showed no sign of distress. The elderly British couple who had been watching moved closer. The woman, her white hair perfectly styled, spoke up in a kind but firm voice that carried the authority of age and local knowledge. "Excuse me, dear," she said to Melania. "I've lived in London my entire life, and I've seen many people try to get these guards to break their stance. It simply doesn't work. They're trained from young men to maintain this discipline no matter what. It's not about you personally. They wouldn't move for the queen herself if she asked while they were on duty. Her husband nodded in agreement, his weathered face showing both sympathy for Melania's frustration and pride in the guards' dedication. It's what makes them special, you see. In a world where everything seems to change and bend, they represent something constant, something reliable. Melania turned to face the couple, her expression softening slightly at their gentle explanation. "But doesn't it seem excessive?" she asked. "Surely there's a difference between maintaining discipline and being unnecessarily rigid." The elderly woman smiled warmly. "That's the thing about discipline, isn't it? It's absolute, or it means nothing. These young men can't pick and choose when to follow their rules based on who's asking. That would defeat the entire purpose." Melania considered these words. Though her pride still smarted from the perceived slight, she had built her public image on grace and elegance, always maintaining control of every situation she entered. This guard's absolute refusal to acknowledge her presence felt like a crack in that carefully constructed image, especially with so many people now watching and recording. The staff member checked her watch anxiously, clearly worried about the schedule. "Mrs. Trump, I really must insist. The Duchess will be arriving shortly and the organizers need you positioned for the greeting ceremony. This is quite an important moment for the charity." Melania took a deep breath, her mind racing through her options. She could continue this confrontation, but that would only make her appear difficult and undiplomatic. She could walk away quietly, but that felt like admitting defeat. Or she could try one final approach, something that might preserve her dignity while acknowledging the situation. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a crisp business card. On it was printed her name, her foundation's information, and a personal message about the importance of education and opportunity for all children. She had brought hundreds of these cards to distribute during the event. "I'm going to leave this here," Melania said, placing the card carefully at the base of the guard's post, tucked just slightly under the edge where it would not blow away. "When your duty is finished, perhaps you'll take a moment to read it. What we're doing here today matters. These children matter. And I hope you'll understand that my frustration wasn't about you personally, but about feeling like I couldn't make that connection." The guard's expression remained unchanged, but something subtle shifted in the air. Perhaps it was the way Melania's voice had lost its demanding edge and gained a note of genuine sincerity. Or perhaps it was simply that time was passing, and the scene needed to reach some kind of resolution. Melania straightened her jacket and adjusted her sunglasses. She looked at the guard one last time, her face showing a complex mixture of frustration, curiosity, and reluctant respect. "I admire dedication," she said quietly, "even when I don't fully understand it." As she turned to follow the staff member toward the palace entrance, the gathered tourists began to disperse, some looking disappointed that the confrontation had ended without any dramatic breakthrough. The elderly couple exchanged satisfied glances, pleased that the situation had been resolved without anyone losing face too badly. The palace doors opened before them, revealing the magnificent interior with its golden decorations and historic portraits lining the walls. The staff member launched into a prepared speech about the layout and the schedule for the event, but Melania only half listened. Her mind remained outside with the silent guard, puzzling over what had just occurred. Inside the palace, other dignitaries were already mingling in the grand reception hall. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ornate ceiling, and servers in crisp uniforms circulated with trays of refreshments. Everyone seemed eager to network and discuss the charitable cause that had brought them together. A photographer approached Melania almost immediately, asking if she would pose for some official event photographs. She agreed automatically, falling into the practiced poses that had become second nature over years of public appearances. Yet even as she smiled for the cameras, her thoughts kept returning to the guard outside. She had traveled the world, met countless people in positions of power and prestige, but she could not remember the last time someone had so completely refused to acknowledge her presence. It bothered her more than she wanted to admit, like a small stone in her shoe that she could not quite remove. A distinguished gentleman in a military dress uniform approached her, introducing himself as a retired colonel who now worked as an advisor for various British charities. His chest displayed several medals earned during long years of service. He had a kind face with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Mrs. Trump, welcome to London," he said warmly. "I hope your visit has been pleasant so far." Melania smiled, politely, though her response carried a hint of her recent frustration. "Mostly pleasant, yes. Though I must say your royal guards are quite stubborn about their protocols. I encountered one outside who wouldn't even acknowledge a simple request." The colonel's eyes crinkled with understanding and perhaps a touch of amusement. "Ah, yes," the colonel said with a knowing nod. "The guards take their duty very seriously indeed. May I share something with you that might help you understand?" Melania welcomed the distraction from her swirling thoughts. "Please do. I'm genuinely curious now. What drives such absolute commitment?" The colonel gestured toward a quieter corner of the reception hall, away from the main crowd. They moved toward a tall window that overlooked the palace gardens, where they could speak more privately. The morning light streamed through the glass, illuminating paintings of historical battles and royal ceremonies that decorated the walls around them. "Those guards you see standing outside," the colonel began, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing a story he had told many times but never tired of telling. "They come from some of Britain's finest regiments. The selection process is extraordinarily rigorous. Only the most disciplined and dedicated soldiers earn the privilege of serving as Queen's Guard." "But why such extreme rules?" Melania asked. "I understand discipline, but not being able to even acknowledge someone seems harsh." The colonel smiled gently. "It goes back hundreds of years to times when the palace faced real threats. Guards who could be distracted even for a moment put everyone at risk. So the rule became absolute: nothing breaks your focus. Not conversation, not discomfort. Not even the most important person in the world standing right in front of you." Melania listened carefully, her frustration beginning to transform into something closer to understanding, though she was not quite ready to admit it completely. "These young men," the colonel continued, "they train for months before they're allowed to stand post. They practice standing still for hours at a time in heat and cold, rain and snow. They learn to ignore pain, discomfort, and all forms of distraction. It becomes more than just following orders. It becomes a point of personal pride and honor." "But surely in modern times," Melania suggested, "such extreme measures aren't necessary. The threats aren't the same as they were centuries ago." The colonel considered this thoughtfully. "Perhaps not. But what these guards represent has evolved beyond just security. They've become symbols of something rare in today's world: unwavering commitment to duty above all else. In an age where everything is negotiable and flexible, they stand as reminders that some things should remain constant." Through the window, Melania could see a portion of the palace grounds. Somewhere beyond her view, that guard still stood at his post, maintaining his silent vigil. She wondered if her business card was still where she had left it, or if the wind had carried it away. "I left him my card," she said quietly, "with information about the charity work we're doing today. Do you think he'll even look at it?" The colonel's expression grew more thoughtful. "I suspect he will once his shift ends. These men are not cold or uncaring, Mrs. Trump. Quite the opposite, in fact. Many of them come from families with strong traditions of service. They believe deeply in duty, honor, and protecting something greater than themselves. Your charity work, helping children gain education and opportunity, that's exactly the kind of cause that would resonate with them." Melania felt something shift inside her chest, a strange mixture of emotions she had not expected. "I think I may have misjudged the situation," she admitted. "I was so focused on feeling disrespected that I didn't consider what his silence actually represented." "That's very gracious of you to say," the colonel replied. "Most people never get past their initial frustration. They see the guard's silence as rudeness rather than dedication, but I think you're beginning to see the truth of it." A bell chimed softly, signaling that the formal program was about to begin. The staff member who had guided Melania inside appeared again, beckoning her toward the main hall where speeches would be given and presentations made about the charity's important work. As Melania walked through the palace corridors, surrounded by centuries of history captured in tapestries and portraits, she thought about dedication and duty in ways she had not considered before. Her own life had been filled with commitments and responsibilities, but they had always come with recognition and acknowledgement. The idea of serving something so completely that you disappeared into the role itself was foreign to her experience. The charity event unfolded beautifully. Speakers discussed the programs being funded, the children whose lives would be changed by education and opportunity. Melania delivered her own prepared remarks, talking about the importance of investing in young minds and breaking cycles of poverty through learning. The audience applauded warmly, and several major donors pledged significant contributions. Yet throughout the presentations and networking conversations that filled the next several hours, part of Melania's mind remained outside with that silent guard. She found herself wondering about his story. Where had he grown up? What had motivated him to join the military? Did he have family who worried about him standing in all weather conditions, maintaining his post no matter what? During a break between sessions, Melania excused herself and walked back toward the entrance hall. The staff member who had been assigned to her followed at a respectful distance, perhaps worried she might create another scene with the guards. But Melania did not approach the guard who had rebuffed her earlier. Instead, she simply stood near one of the tall windows, gazing out at the ceremonial posts where several guards maintained their eternal vigil. From this distance, they looked almost identical in their red tunics and tall bearskin hats, like chess pieces carefully positioned on the palace grounds. "It's quite moving, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Melania turned to see an older woman wearing an elegant dress and a small tiara that suggested minor nobility. Her face was kind but carried the weight of years of observing royal protocols and traditions. "I was just thinking about dedication," Melania replied, "about what it means to commit yourself so completely to something that you become invisible in the process." The woman nodded knowingly. "That's exactly what they do. They surrender their individual identity for the duration of their duty. It's quite beautiful in its way, though I understand why it can be frustrating for those who don't know the tradition." "I may have made a bit of a scene earlier," Melania admitted with unusual candor. "I wasn't very understanding about the protocols." "Don't be too hard on yourself," the woman said gently. "We've all been there. I remember as a young girl I tried everything to make a guard laugh. I made faces, told jokes, even tried tickling one with a feather. Nothing worked. It was my grandmother who finally explained it to me in a way I could understand." "What did she say?" Melania asked, genuinely curious. The woman smiled at the memory. "She told me that the guards were like the stones of the palace itself. Individual stones might seem unimportant, but together they create something magnificent that can stand for centuries. Each guard's commitment, no matter how small it might seem, was part of maintaining something much larger and more important than any one person." Melania absorbed these words, feeling them settle into her understanding like pieces of a puzzle, finally finding their proper places. She had spent so much of her life focused on individual achievement and recognition that she had rarely considered the power of becoming part of something greater by surrendering personal acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said to the woman. "That helps me see it differently." They stood together for a moment longer, two women from very different worlds united briefly in contemplation of duty and sacrifice. The charity event concluded in the late afternoon with a reception in the palace gardens. Tables had been set up under white canopies, and guests mingled while enjoying tea and delicate pastries. The conversation flowed easily, mixing discussions of charitable work with lighter topics about London society and international diplomacy. Melania participated graciously, moving from group to group, always maintaining her elegant composure. Yet she found herself repeatedly glancing toward the palace walls, wondering if the guard she had confronted was still at his post or if his shift had ended. She wondered if he had found her business card, if he had read it, if he had understood what she was trying to accomplish with her visit. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, the event organizers began thanking everyone for their attendance and contributions. Melania said her goodbyes to various dignitaries and accepted their compliments on her speech with practiced grace. The staff member who had guided her throughout the day appeared once more to escort her back to her waiting car. They walked through the palace's interior corridors one final time, their footsteps echoing against marble floors that had witnessed centuries of history. Portraits of kings and queens watched their passage with painted eyes that had seen countless visitors come and go through these hallowed halls. As they approached the main entrance, Melania's heart beat a little faster. She told herself it was simply fatigue from a long day of diplomatic duties, but she knew the truth. She wanted to see if that guard was still there, if anything had changed, if somehow the universe might offer her a chance to understand better what had transpired that morning. The heavy doors opened before them, and the evening air rushed in, cooler now than the warmth of midday. Melania stepped through and immediately looked toward the post where she had encountered the unresponsive guard hours earlier. A different guard stood there now, equally motionless and silent, maintaining the same unwavering stance. This one appeared slightly older, his face showing more lines around the eyes, but his dedication seemed no less absolute. The changing of the guard must have occurred while she was inside attending the event. Melania felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. She had hoped, though she had not fully admitted it to herself, that she might see the original guard again, perhaps even exchange a meaningful glance that would somehow validate her earlier frustration and her subsequent understanding. But he was gone, replaced by another silent sentinel, and her business card had vanished as well. "Mrs. Trump," the staff member said gently, "your car is waiting." Melania nodded but did not immediately move toward the vehicle. Instead, she approached the current guard, stopping at a respectful distance. She did not try to speak to him or make any requests. She simply stood for a moment observing him with new eyes, seeing not an obstacle or a slight to her dignity, but a young man committed to something he believed in deeply. "Thank you for your service," she said quietly, knowing he would not respond but feeling compelled to say it anyway. "What you do matters, even if most people don't understand it." The guard's expression remained unchanged, his eyes fixed on that distant point that only he could see. But Melania felt satisfied nonetheless. She had said what needed to be said, not for his acknowledgement but because it was the right thing to do. As she turned toward her car, something caught her eye. Near the base of a pillar, almost hidden in shadow, she noticed a small object. She moved closer and saw it was her business card, but it had been carefully placed, not carelessly dropped or blown by the wind. Someone had positioned it deliberately, tucked securely so it would not be disturbed. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. That simple gesture told her everything she needed to know. The guard she had confronted that morning had found her card after his shift ended. He had read it, understood what she was trying to accomplish with her visit, and he had preserved it rather than discarding it. Perhaps he had even been moved by the message about helping children gain access to education and opportunity. She bent down and retrieved the card, noticing that the corners were slightly worn, as if someone had held it, turned it over, read it multiple times. She slipped it back into her handbag, feeling its weight differently now than she had that morning. The ride back to her hotel passed in contemplative silence. Her security team sat alert, scanning the London streets for any potential threats. But Melania barely noticed the famous landmarks passing by her window. Her mind was processing the day's events, reassembling her understanding of respect, duty, and what it truly meant to serve something greater than oneself. That evening, alone in her hotel suite, Melania sat by the window overlooking the Thames River. The city lights reflected on the dark water, creating dancing patterns that mesmerized her tired eyes. She pulled out her journal, something she had maintained for years as a way of processing significant experiences. She wrote about the guard, about her initial frustration and her subsequent understanding. She described the conversation with the retired colonel and the elderly British couple, the way their explanations had slowly shifted her perspective. She reflected on the noblewoman's story about stones building a palace, individual contributions creating something magnificent that could last for centuries. As her pen moved across the paper, Melania realized she was learning something important about herself. She had built much of her identity around being acknowledged, recognized, and respected for who she was and what she represented. The guard's refusal to do so had felt like a personal attack, a dismissal of everything she had accomplished. But his silence had not been about her at all. It had been about him and his commitment to something he valued more than personal interaction or individual recognition. In a strange way, his dedication paralleled her own work, though expressed through completely different means. She worked to help children through education and opportunity, making her impact through visibility and influence. He served his country through absolute discipline and self-sacrifice, making his impact by becoming invisible. Both approaches had value. Both required dedication. Neither was superior to the other, just different paths toward contributing something meaningful to the world. She thought about the children who would benefit from the funds raised at that day's event. Many of them came from difficult circumstances, lacking the privileges and opportunities she had known throughout her life. The programs being funded would help them access education that could transform their futures, breaking cycles of poverty and limitation. Those children would never know the name of the guard who stood silently at his post that morning. They would never know about the confrontation at the palace entrance or the lessons Melania had learned from it. But in some small way, that guard's dedication to his duty was connected to the success of the charitable event, to the dignity and tradition of the palace that gave weight to the occasion, to the serious commitment everyone made to helping those children. Everything was connected, Melania realized. Individual actions rippled outward in ways that were not always visible or acknowledged, but that did not make them any less important. The guard's silence had taught her more about true service than 1,000 conversations might have done. She closed her journal and set it aside, feeling the day's exhaustion finally settling into her bones. Tomorrow she would return to her regular schedule, filled with appearances and commitments that would once again place her in the spotlight. But something had shifted inside her, a subtle recalibration of how she understood respect and recognition. The next morning arrived too quickly. Melania woke to the sound of rain pattering against her hotel windows, the London weather shifting as it often did. She ordered breakfast in her room and prepared for another full day of scheduled appearances and meetings. Her staff had already sent her briefing materials about the organizations she would be visiting and the people she would meet. As she reviewed the schedule, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from the retired colonel she had spoken with at the palace event. The subject line read simply, "Thought you might find this interesting." She opened the email and began reading. The colonel had attached a short article about the history of the Royal Guards along with a personal note. He wrote that after their conversation, he had reached out to the palace security coordinator, who had shared something remarkable about the guard Melania had encountered. Her heart quickened as she continued reading. According to the coordinator, the young guard's name was James Peterson. He was 23 years old and had been serving with the Grenadier Guards for 2 years. His family had a long military tradition stretching back 4 generations. His great-grandfather had died during World War II defending London from air raids. His grandfather had served in the Falklands. His father had been deployed to Afghanistan, but what struck Melania most deeply was what came next. James Peterson had lost his younger sister to illness 3 years earlier. She had been only 15 when she passed away, and her greatest unfulfilled dream had been to attend university and become a teacher. The family could not afford the medical treatments that might have saved her, and they definitely could not have afforded higher education, even if she had survived. After reading Melania's business card about educational opportunities for underprivileged children, James had approached his commanding officer and requested permission to make a donation to the charity from his modest military salary. It was not a large amount, certainly nothing compared to the contributions made by wealthy donors at the event, but it represented a significant portion of what he earned standing at that post day after day. The colonel's note concluded, "I thought you should know that your encounter, however frustrating it may have felt in the moment, had a profound impact. Sometimes the people who seem most resistant to our message are actually the ones who understand its importance most deeply." Melania set down her phone, her eyes stinging with unexpected tears. She sat very still for a long moment, processing this new information and what it meant. That young guard had not been dismissing her or showing disrespect. He had been doing exactly what he was trained to do, honoring his duty with the same dedication that had defined his family for generations. And afterward, moved by her message about helping children pursue education, he had made a personal sacrifice to support that cause. She thought about his sister, about dreams unfulfilled and potential lost to circumstances beyond anyone's control. She thought about all the children out there facing similar obstacles, lacking the resources and opportunities that could transform their lives. The work she was doing through her foundation suddenly felt more urgent and personal than it had before. Later that morning, as her car navigated London's busy streets toward her next appointment, Melania made a decision. She asked her assistant to contact the palace and request a private meeting with James Peterson, if such a thing could be arranged without violating protocols or causing awkwardness. The assistant looked surprised but made the necessary calls. After several conversations and consultations with various officials, an arrangement was made. James Peterson would be off duty that afternoon, and if he was willing, He could meet with Mrs. Trump at a quiet location away from cameras and media attention. The meeting was set for a small private room at a military club in central London. Melania arrived early, her security team taking positions discreetly around the building. She had asked them to remain as invisible as possible, wanting this conversation to feel as natural and unforced as circumstances allowed. When James Peterson entered the room, Melania was struck by how different he looked without his ceremonial uniform. He wore civilian clothes, simple jeans and a sweater, and his face showed a mixture of nervousness and confusion about why he had been summoned. He was tall and lean, with the bearing of someone accustomed to discipline but the eyes of someone much younger than his military service might suggest. "Mr. Peterson," Melania said, standing and extending her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Please sit down. I promise this isn't any kind of official business or reprimand. I simply wanted to speak with you personally." James shook her hand with a firm grip and sat down awkwardly on the edge of the chair across from her. "Mrs. Trump, I'm not sure why I'm here, but I'm honored to meet you properly. I hope I didn't cause any offense yesterday at the palace. I was just following protocols, nothing personal intended." Melania smiled warmly, trying to put him at ease. "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. I owe you an apology. When we encountered each other yesterday morning, I was frustrated by your silence. I took it personally when it wasn't personal at all. I didn't understand what your duty really meant or what it represented about your character and commitment." James looked genuinely surprised. "No apology needed, Mrs. Trump. I understand completely. Most visitors don't know about our protocols. We're trained to expect reactions like yours and not take them personally either." "But I should have known better," Melania insisted. "I've traveled extensively and encountered many different customs and traditions. I should have been more respectful and patient. Instead, I let my ego get in the way of understanding." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing this unexpected conversation. Through the windows, rain continued to fall on London, blurring the city into soft shapes and muted colors. "I received some information about you," Melania continued gently, "about your family's military history and about your sister. I hope you don't mind that it was shared with me. I wanted you to know that I read your story, and it moved me deeply." James's composure flickered for just a moment, emotion crossing his face before he regained control. "My sister Sarah, she was brilliant. So much smarter than me. She loved books and learning. Used to say she wanted to teach children from difficult backgrounds, kids like we were growing up. Give them the chances she never had. That's exactly the work we're trying to do," Melania said softly. "The charity event yesterday. It's all about creating educational opportunities for children who face the same obstacles your sister faced. Breaking down the barriers that prevent talented young people from reaching their potential." "I know," James said. "I read your card, the one you left at my post. It really affected me, made me think about Sarah and what she would have wanted. That's why I made that donation. I know it's not much compared to what wealthy people can give, but it felt important to contribute something." Melania felt her throat tighten again. "Your contribution means more than you know. It's not about the amount. It's about the spirit behind it, the understanding of why this work matters. You honored your sister's memory in a beautiful way." James nodded, struggling to maintain his military composure in the face of these emotions. "Standing at that post yesterday after you walked away, I kept thinking about what you'd said, about the children who would benefit from the event. I realized that maybe my silence, my duty, it's all connected to protecting something bigger, the traditions and stability that allow charitable work like yours to happen. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," Melania assured him. They talked for nearly an hour, their conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. James told stories about his training, the challenges of maintaining absolute stillness while tourists tried every trick to break his composure. He spoke about his family's military tradition and the pride his father felt watching him serve as a royal guard. He described how standing at that post hour after hour had taught him patience and perspective about what really mattered in life. Melania shared her own experiences with public service, the pressure of always being watched and judged, the difficulty of maintaining composure when every moment might be photographed and analyzed. She talked about her foundation's work and the children whose lives had been changed through access to education and opportunity. She spoke about her own journey from Slovenia to America, the obstacles she had faced and overcome, and how that experience shaped her commitment to helping others. As their conversation deepened, both of them realized they had more in common than might have been apparent from their first encounter. Both understood dedication to duty, though they expressed it differently. Both had experienced judgment and criticism from people who did not understand their motivations. Both believed in service to something greater than themselves. "You know what I learned from yesterday?" Melania said as their meeting drew toward its natural conclusion. "I learned that respect has many forms. I was so focused on receiving the kind of respect I was accustomed to, immediate acknowledgement and response, that I couldn't see the deeper respect you were showing to your duty, your country, your family's tradition. Your silence wasn't disrespect toward me. It was the highest form of respect toward something you value more than personal recognition." James considered this thoughtfully. "I never thought about it quite that way, but you're right. When we stand at those posts, we're not just following orders. We're honoring everyone who served before us, everyone who sacrificed more than we ever will. My great-grandfather didn't come home from the war. My father carries shrapnel in his leg from Afghanistan. Compared to what they gave, standing still and silent for a few hours seems like the least I can do." Melania reached across the table and placed her hand gently on his. "Your sister would be very proud of you, not just for your military service, but for understanding what she valued and finding a way to honor that. The donation you made, it might help send a child to university who becomes the teacher Sarah wanted to be." "That's a beautiful legacy." James's eyes glistened, but he maintained his composure. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. And thank you for what you're doing, for caring about children who don't have the advantages others take for granted. Sarah would have loved knowing that people like you are fighting for kids like she was." As they stood to say goodbye, Melania felt compelled to do something unexpected. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small pin. The logo of her educational foundation worked in enamel and gold. It was something she gave to major donors and important supporters, a token of appreciation for their commitment to the cause. "I want you to have this," she said, pressing it into his hand, not as a former First Lady giving something to a soldier, just as one person who cares about education giving a gift to another person who understands why this work matters. Wear it when you want to remember your sister and the difference you're making in her memory. James held the pin carefully, as if it were something precious and fragile. "I'll treasure this. Thank you, Mrs. Trump. This conversation, this entire experience, it's shown me that my small contribution can be part of something much bigger. That standing at my post and donating a bit of my salary, it all connects to helping children achieve their dreams." They shook hands again, but this time it felt different from their first handshake. There was warmth now, mutual understanding and respect born from honest conversation and shared values. As James left the room, Melania watched him go, feeling grateful for this unexpected encounter and all it had taught her. Over the following months, Melania often thought about James Peterson and their conversation. Whenever she attended charitable events or made speeches about educational opportunity, she remembered that young guard standing silently at his post, honoring his duty while carrying his sister's memory in his heart. She realized that the people who supported her foundation's work came from all backgrounds and circumstances. From wealthy donors who could write large checks to working soldiers who gave what they could from modest salaries. Every contribution mattered. Every person who understood the importance of education and opportunity played a role in creating change. The recognition and acknowledgement she had once thought so essential seemed less important now. What mattered was the work itself, the children whose lives were being transformed, the dreams being fulfilled that might otherwise have died unfulfilled, like Sarah Peterson's dream of becoming a teacher. Melania made changes to how her foundation operated, creating new ways for people of modest means to contribute and feel connected to the mission. She established a special recognition program named in honor of Sarah Peterson, celebrating donors who gave sacrificially from limited resources. She spoke more often about the importance of service in all its forms, acknowledging that dedication and commitment could be expressed through silence and stillness just as powerfully as through speeches and public appearances. The story of her encounter with the Royal Guard eventually reached the media, though the details became somewhat distorted through retellings. Some versions made Melania seem demanding and difficult. Others made the Guard seem unnecessarily rigid and rude. But those who knew the true story understood it differently. They saw it as a moment when two people from different worlds found common ground through honest reflection and mutual respect. James Peterson continued his service with the Royal Guard, standing at his post with the same dedication he had always shown, but now he wore the small foundation pin on his civilian clothes, a reminder of his sister and his connection to something larger than military duty alone. He spoke to other soldiers about the importance of supporting charitable causes, encouraging them to look beyond their immediate circumstances and consider how they could contribute to positive change. Several of his fellow guards, inspired by his example, also made donations to educational charities. They began to see their ceremonial duties not as isolated actions but as part of a larger tradition of service that extended beyond military protocols into caring for their communities and supporting causes that helped vulnerable people. Years later, when Melania was asked about the most impactful moment in her charitable work, she often mentioned that rainy morning at Buckingham Palace, not because of the funds raised at the event or the important connections made, but because of what she learned from a young guard who taught her about respect, duty, and the many forms that dedication can take. She learned that true service often goes unrecognized and unacknowledged. She learned that the people who seem most resistant to our messages might actually understand them most deeply. She learned that pride and ego can blind us to the value of different perspectives and approaches. Most importantly, she learned that meaningful connections can emerge from the most unlikely encounters, if we remain open to learning and growing from them. The rain-spotted business card she had left at the guard's post remained in her personal files, a reminder of that transformative day. Sometimes when preparing for important events or making difficult decisions about the Foundation's direction, she would take out the card and remember James Peterson's face when he talked about his sister's dreams. She would remember the lesson that silence could teach, that stillness could speak volumes, and that respect came in many forms. The children who benefited from the Foundation's work never knew about the Royal Guard or the lesson his silence had taught. They simply received opportunities to pursue education, to develop their talents, to dream dreams that might actually come true. Each scholarship awarded, each program funded, each life changed carried within it a small echo of that morning encounter, the unexpected connection between a former First Lady and a young soldier who both understood the importance of serving something greater than themselves. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the initial frustration or the awkward confrontation, but the growth that came from being willing to see beyond our first reactions and assumptions. Not the recognition or acknowledgement we think we deserve, but the quiet satisfaction of contributing to something meaningful and lasting. Not the appearance of respect, but the genuine article, earned through dedication, humility, and the courage to admit when we have misunderstood something important. The encounter at Buckingham Palace became a turning point for Melania, a moment when she glimpsed a different kind of strength and commitment than she had previously recognized. It reminded her that every person has a story, every silence has a meaning, and every interaction offers an opportunity to learn something valuable if we approach it with openness and humility rather than defensiveness and pride. And somewhere in London, a young guard continued standing at his post, eyes fixed on that distant point, maintaining his silent vigil while carrying in his heart the memory of a sister who dreamed of teaching children.